In terms of the logistics, keep yourself on mute unless you want to ask a question. Then by all means you can jump in. If you would prefer, and perhaps it's a pattern we'd like to get into, if there is a question that pops up and you think it can wait to the end, add it into the chat section in Zoom. You'll find that little panel at the bottom of Zoom where you can just type into the chat. And what we'll do is Kwezi will just keep track of those questions, and we'll make sure that Nilesh gets an opportunity to answer them at the end. If there is a burning question and you're absolutely going to explode unless you get the answer to it right now, if that happens, absolutely put your hand up if you are on screen. Otherwise, use the raise hand functionality on Zoom. And what we'll do is Nilesh will then be able to take your question as he goes. Towards the end of the session, we're going to post a Google feedback form. And the idea is that since this is a new speakers session, we would like to give all of our speakers some very valid, relevant feedback on their talk. So the Google form will be given, all of the information will be given to Nilesh. It asks a couple of standard questions. And then there's also a section where you can just give him a general comment. And then the idea is for him to kind of use that feedback and to grow in his role as a speaker. So please complete that. We will post it towards the end of Nilesh's session. Nilesh's session will take us about an hour today. We only have one session booked for today. So hopefully we won't take up the full 2 hours that we've got booked in your diary. And then just a reminder of the next session on Monday, the 1st of February. And I'm going to hand over to Chris to introduce Nilesh.
Thank you so much, Angie. Just a quick disclaimer. I'm in a space where I'm surrounded by lots of animals. There's hadidahs, there's dogs, there's a chicken next door. So if you hear any other intervening sound, please bear with me. But yeah, I do have the privilege of introducing our speaker. Nilesh is the founding director at Padawan Consulting. What I like about what they do in terms of the space playing in digital transformation is that they believe that transformed business is actually brought about by transformed individuals or transformed people. And I think I like that sort of play with words to say it's people that actually bring a transformed business. So I actually like that part in particular. And later on, as he speaks, he'll talk more about himself professionally. I do want to highlight one thing though, that one of the things that he says he relaxes with, or is one of his favorite genres, is sci-fi or science fiction. It actually confirms what I've always believed about science fiction people. They're both intelligent and innovative, and you will hear about particularly how innovative and how passionate about innovation he is. So without wasting further time, just want to present to you or give to you the golden voice, Nilesh Makan. And take it away.
Good. Thank you very much, Chris, for those very kind words. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It's lovely to have you all online and here to kind of share some ideas and thoughts with me around a little bit about agility and a little bit about innovation and design thinking. So kind of maybe just a quick background about myself, just so that you know how I got here. So I kind of started out my career at IBM, doing a lot of systems management work. So we used to roll out a tool called Tivoli, and we used to do all the technical work around that for big enterprises, worked in most of the banks and so forth. I then moved into business process consulting, also within the IBM space, and focused a lot on information security processes. I then jumped over to PwC, where I did a lot of work in IT strategy and IT governance. I then moved to Sasol, to a proper corporate company instead of a consulting company. And I spent about 11 years at Sasol, starting out in the ambit of information security. So I used to head up information security at Sasol. I then moved into the enterprise risk management space, where you used to do all the board reports for all the top risks across the organization, everything from macroeconomics to diversity in the company to the integrated value chain. So it gave me a lot of good exposure of how a company should be run from a group perspective, and particularly be a big multinational like Sasol was great to be involved there. I then used some of my IT strategy skills and I was made the digital lead for enablement for our digital strategy. And that's kind of where I came across this notion of what Agile is, because when we think about digital transformation, a lot of people think it's about the technology, but when you kind of learn around agility, you realize it's got a lot more to do with the people, the ways of work, and how you think about delivering solutions. And I fell in love with the concept of what Agile brought. And as Agile evolved, I kind of got a little bit more understanding and got really intrigued around what design thinking is and how innovation works. And I think it's something that I've always it's always intrigued me, but I've never really got an opportunity to really try and experiment with it. So I'm really enjoying this current life I have, where we're trying to make change, particularly within the digital space. So just a quick icebreaker, and I'm going to ask you in your chat to please, sorry, I can't see my chat. There you go. So I'm going to ask 3 questions, and please in the chat window type answers to this, just as an icebreaker and to get the creative juices flowing. So the first question is, fill in the blank. When I dance, I look like. Crazy says a robot. Basani says, no, lady can't dance. I hope you can at least do Jerusalem. Brenda Fassi. Chris, I probably agree with you. I'm pretty much not myself either. I like that. A person in the old world. That's how you should be dancing, Alison. Michael Jackson. I'm impressed, Joseph. All right, so the next question is, describe your personality using ice cream flavors. Tropical sounds like a lovely fruity flavor. Salted caramel, Angie. Okay, so just a mishmash there of all the different colors. Chris, what is the default flavor? I don't know if it's vanilla or chocolate. Caramel with lots of sprinkles sounds delicious. So lots of people that like caramel. Cool. And then the last question is, what's the strangest word you know? And if it doesn't sound familiar, I'm going to ask you to please explain to us what that word means. Oxymoron. I like that word. Onomatopoeia. Does everyone know what onomatopoeia is? While they're thinking, Alison, maybe explain what onomatopoeia means.
Sorry. I hope I'm remembering correctly that it's when the word sounds, the sound of saying the word gives you what it's supposed to be describing.
Yes, like bang.
Yes. Yes.
Correct. Right. I can't even pronounce Angie's word. Pluviophile.
Pluviophile. It's someone who loves rain.
Someone who loves rain, a pluviophile. That's very interesting. Chris is cute. I agree, Chris. It's a waste of letters. Okay. Cool. So let's just jump forward, right? So when we kind of talk about Agile, I think everyone understands that Scrum is based on a number of behaviors. And one of the first behaviors is respect, which is really important because in Scrum team, we have to treat each other like adults, have adult conversations, and make sure that we respect other people for their opinions. We also have to be very open. So we need to be able to ask for help when it's needed. We need to be open to share new perspectives. We need to be open to admit when we're wrong. Because there is no direct leader in a Scrum team, we have to be very committed to the team. So everyone needs to be involved, and when you say something, you need to commit to that what you say and what you're going to deliver. We have to have some level of focus, and lots of really good work by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi that talks about focus and the importance of getting productive delivery by focusing on things one at a time, and not losing as much to context switching. And then the last one is courage, and courage is quite an important one. And I thought I'll just explore a little bit more about courage in this presentation. So when we kind of talk about courage, I always like to start with the dictionary definition of something. And the dictionary definition of courage is a mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. And kind of when I think about this, I can't, and just some background. We all love reading in the family, and my daughter. This is my daughter with her cousin and her friends. My daughter is the one with the book that says "Impossible Parents," which I think is true. We are quite difficult parents on us sometimes, but fair at the same time. And one of the books. I used to read to my daughter when she was a little younger. Now she reads by herself, which is sad because I don't read all those lovely children's stories anymore. But one of the books I used to read to her was a book called Scary Squirrel by Melanie Watt. And the story of Scary Squirrel is as follows. Scary Squirrel spent a lot of time in his nut tree, and he had this daily routine, a daily pattern of what he did. He woke up in the morning, he saw the sun rise, he ate a nut, he then walked around the tree, he then ate another nut, and he just continued on this day-to-day routine. And when it came to Scary Squirrel, there's this outside of the tree, which was the unknown, right? And we all fear this notion of what the unknown is. And Scary Squirrel was tremendously afraid of the unknown. And besides the unknown, Scary Squirrel was afraid of quite a few things. So one of the things he was afraid was of green Martians, afraid of killer bees. He was terrified of tarantulas. He didn't like poison ivy. He was a bit of a germaphobe, as we all are during COVID, and we don't like germs any longer. And Scary Squirrel was afraid of sharks. And I suppose, being in risk management previously, I understand that you have to be prepared for these things, right? So Scary Squirrel was quite prepared for these things. And he had a preparedness kit, an emergency kit. And part of his kit was a hard hat. He had antibacterial soap because we all should be washing for 30 seconds after when we come home. He had calamine lotion. He had a parachute in case he needed to leave the tree. He had bug spray. He had, again, being a germaphobe, and we all realized this during COVID, he had his mask and rubber gloves, he had a net, Band-Aid, and sardines. And Scary Squirrel also had a preparedness plan, because that's also quite important, right? So his plan was to, step one, panic, run, get the kit, put on the kit, consult, exit plan, and exit the tree, but only absolutely, definitely, and truly no other option to leave that tree. So, and this is a dramatization of what Scary Squirrel looks like with his emergency kit on. But then what happens is a killer bee appears in front of Scary Squirrel, and Scary Squirrel jumps in panic and he knocks his emergency kit out of the tree. And obviously this wasn't part of the plan. And when we think about disruption, for me, this is what disruption really means, because I think when we think about disruption and digital transformation and all these lovely things, we don't really understand the extent of exponential technologies. I think we all tend to look at technologies being very linear, but things happen, and no amount of preparedness can help us deal with some of these things. Particularly, you look at COVID, I mean, that was not part of our plan, and yet it happened, and we all had to adapt and innovate around that. But what happens is when you start embracing these things, as Scary Squirrel did, he got scared and he jumped after his emergency kit and he started to glide, and he realized that he's no ordinary squirrel, he's a flying squirrel. And when he did this, he jumped, he felt overjoyed, he felt adventurous, he felt carefree, he felt alive until he landed in the bush. And and during this process, he forgets all about the fact that the killer bee was there and all the stuff around the tarantulas and poison ivy and stuff, like he forgets all about that. So I think when we kind of look at this, and the moral of the story is that while the unknown is still there, and Scary Squirrel is still a little bit afraid of the unknown, he's changed his daily routine, and now every day he jumps out of the tree and he enjoys that process, and we'll see how that progresses further on. So what I've done is I kind of want to have a conversation, not me, but I want you to have a conversation around, and we want to break up into groups. I'm not sure if everyone has access to Mural, but I have put a link into the chat, and if it's not there, we can add the link again if you've joined late. But what I really want you to do is break out into teams and go and have a chat around what are some of the things you're afraid of the future. So I just want to see if.
So I just want
Okay,
to.
thank you.
Can I pop everybody? I just want to see, is everybody here? Put your hands up if you have Mural or Miro experience. I just want to make sure that I'm distributing the room so that there's equal skill level. At least it doesn't have to be extreme. It just needs to be a little bit. Okay, so I've got Jutta, I've got Alison. Anybody else had Mural or Miro experience? Okay, so what I've done is I have put Crazy Nono. I've popped you into 2 separate rooms. And Alison, you, okay, so I think I've got a good distribution. If you guys get stuck with anything, just call for help and I'll jump in. Okay, awesome. Can I open up the rooms, Nilesh?
Please do, Angie.
Going to give you guys 8 minutes. Is everybody in the Mural board? Has everybody been able to access it? I did just pop it into the link, into the chat in Zoom. Okay. Awesome. I'm going to pop you into your rooms. Give me a shout if you need some help. There you go. Everybody should start coming back.
Perfect. Okay. Good. All right, so thank you. I hope you had some eventful conversation. Maybe just a quick overview from each of the groups, spending 2 minutes each, just talking about some of the things that you felt fearful about the future. So we'll start with group 1. If someone can just raise their hand and just give a high-level overview of what the conversation was about, please.
Bella, you want to go?
No, thank you. Go ahead, proceed. You can on your side. Thank you.
We had a lot of alignment in terms of the things that concern us, and it revolved around problems of the economy getting worse, especially because of the impact of this year, and not trusting that the government is able to deal with the challenges, that they don't have sustainable plans. That as across the country that we have increasing inequality, which leads to more and more division, and that there's too little access to education, and that all of these problems tend to compound upon each other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison. That's great. Group 2, maybe just quickly nominate someone and overview of what you talked about, please.
I can quickly chat about it because I think I added quite some points. So the one point around access to training and skills development, I think just to give a context around that, that's around sort of trying to move into new different areas in terms of what is adequate sort of training that you can do. There's so much online content right now. It's actually hard to know what is the right ones, which the industries look at, which companies look at, and also which you also want to look at them as cost effective that you're not paying arm and leg for. And also, are you getting the same value that you get from doing the online format compared to the face-to-face? For example, I was looking at doing a SAFE course, but now it's now moved to online. Would it be the same, growth and development I'll get compared to that? So and then job security, I think COVID, a lot of companies are restructuring. A lot of companies are not hiring right now. So those things, and then challenges moving to the new areas with lack of skills and experience, I think links to those 2 points mentioned.
Cool. Thank you, Naledi. And then group 3, please.
Okay, I'll give the feedback about group 3 because we lost one of our participants, and Jesus asked that I give the feedback. So we found this question very, very, very hard to answer, Nilesh, and it's basically because Juta and I, who were in the same group, we are pretty much the same. We love the unknown and the unexpected. So we find that very, like the interruptions that happen in life, we find that's what makes the world and our lives exciting. But the two things that we are most fearful of is basically losing our loved ones, as well as our children's happiness. With the issues that we have in the world right now with the mental diseases that we have with depression, we obviously don't want our children to ever, fall into that. So that's it for group 3.
Lovely. That's very sweet. Thank you, Kwezi. All right. So that's lovely. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Just going to stop sharing that screen and share my other screen again. Okay. So kind of when we're talking a little bit around now digital and disruption, and there's a lot of challenges that I think they are facing the world at the moment. But I also believe that technology is a key enabler of these things. How do we leverage technology to drive more purposeful and human-centric solutions? And kind of when we think about it, disruption is inevitable, right? There's an impermanence to everything, and it's important for ourselves as well as our organizations that we work for to continuously reinvent, and that reinvention becomes essential. Particularly talking around digitalization, there's this really interesting law called the law of accelerating returns. And this is something that was coined by Ray Kurzweil, who's the founder of Singularity University. And what the point is that we kind of at the moment using new computers to design even faster new computers, right? So everything from quantum computing, which uses quantum mechanics and superposition and entanglement to kind of process things completely differently using qubits. And this acceleration is just going to get faster and faster. And when we do the math, Ray Kurzweil says that we're going to experience about 20,000 years of technological change in the next 100 years. So how do we keep up to speed with this pace of change? And Sun Tzu said that to know your enemy, you must become your enemy. So if you're not really disrupting yourself as an organization, if you're not cannibalizing yourself, you're going to be cannibalized yourself. And I love this slide, which kind of says that when you think about innovation and disruption, right, often disruption is caused by innovation, which makes innovation the source of disruption. But ironically, it's also the antidote to being displaced by disruption. So if you continually innovate yourself, you can overcome this a little easier. And, kind of when we think about this notion of what courage is that we live in very uncertain times. And the only certainty, as per Richard Feynman in his book, The Meaning of It All, says that the only certainty is that the future is uncertain. And when we think about this from a courageous perspective, in a leadership role, we need courage. And the courage is really to take action in the face of uncertainty. Ben Horowitz, in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, says that a leader must have the courage to bet the company in a direction, even though she does not know if that direction is right. And that's really important, because if you do not make any decisions, it's going to be very difficult to measure how successful you are. The way I see it, and kind of what I think about how all of this fits together from an agile and an innovation perspective, is to really start with these four concepts. The first concept is really envision the future, and that envisioning means setting a clear vision that is available to everyone. It must be purposeful, so you have to start with why, of what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve it. Then we also kind of need to look at these strategic signals. So this is where you need to have some level of horizon scanning. We need to look into the future of where things could potentially disrupt the business, and then kind of figure, how do we deal with that? And then we innovate and we iterate. And we'll go through each of these in particular through the presentation. So when we talk about vision, the description, if you Google it, is that the vision is an aspirational description of what the company, product, or project aims to achieve. It provides clear guidance and is the North Star that sets the long-term direction for the team. And it's fundamental to ensure that alignment happens between the team. And I'll kind of show you a model how that works. But before I do, I found it very interesting that when we talk about the North Star, and unfortunately, from a South African perspective, we don't have a North Star. I think there is one person from the US online. If you look into the sky in the US in the Northern Hemisphere, you'll see a North Star, and it's easy to guide you in terms of that direction. But from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, we have to look at things differently. And I like that, right? It allows us to take a different view on things. So how we find the North Star in the South Pole, in the Southern Hemisphere, is we kind of have to look for the Southern Cross. And the Southern Cross is these four little stars in the sky with two pointer stars. And the easiest way to show how this works and to find the celestial South Pole is to look for the Southern Cross, look for the two pointer stars, look at the pointer stars and draw a line in your head perpendicular from the pointer stars, with the other line from the top of the cross all the way down. And envision where those things intersect, and where they intersect is the true celestial South Pole. And then once you find that, turn and walk in the other direction. Upon researching this, I also found it very interesting, and I digress, but I did find it interesting that there's a number of flags that feature the Southern Cross, and I didn't know this, right? So if you look at the Brazilian flag, it's got the Southern Cross. If you look at the New Zealand flag, it's prominent on the New Zealand flag, as well as Samoa, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. Something I found really interesting and had no idea. But like I said, I digress. So when we kind of think about vision, right, Simon Sinek is the authoritative work around, understanding why you do things. What is your purpose? So in many organizations, I think there's a good idea of what the organization does. Those are the services or products that are sold or offered. Some organizations also have a good idea of how they do it, and these are the differentiators, the stuff that sets them apart from the competition. But very few organizations really understand their purpose and why they do it. And that's not really about the making money side of things, but it's really the underlying purpose of why people get up and go to work. And that's really important when setting your vision. And kind of what I came up with is a little bit of a model around how I see all of this working. So the model kind of looks at two axes, and on the one axis, the y-axis is alignment, and on the other axis is autonomy. And basically, these are correlated, right? So the way I see it is that you have to be very clear on your vision, which we've just talked about. You have to be very clear on your purpose. You have to be very understanding of clear on your strategy and what you're trying to achieve. You have to understand your objectives and those key results that support those objectives. And even from a values perspective, those things need to be clear and bought in, because if you have values that are misaligned with your employees, you can have some level of incongruence, and people come to work and don't bring them best selves. Once you have all these things set up, and the inverse is true, right? And before I move on to transparency, if you're not clear on your vision, purpose, strategy, objectives, and values, and you're not making them transparent across the organization, it just held by a handful of senior leaders, it means that you have to tell people what to do, and you have to then go lower down on the spectrum, and you become a more command and control organization, because you can't give that much autonomy, because people don't know what to do. But if you do have it and you have developed it preferably bottom up rather than top down, you then make that available to the entire company. And then you have this notion of trust and competence, which I feel is very important. And then competence is someone, so Bevan actually helped bring the notion of what competence is into this methodology. But and it's a very important point, because once you have transparency, you have to have trust that people will be able to deliver, and the people have to have trust that the organization will support them. And very similar from a competence perspective, if you don't have sufficient competence to deliver, it means people have to tell you a little bit more what to do. So it's mutually beneficial if you have this notion of trust and competence. If you do have a higher level of trust and competence, then you have more self-organization and collaboration. And the self-organization and collaboration allows you more focus and flow. And we kind of talked at a high level around what focus and flow is. And ideally, the way I see it is that focus and flow should theoretically, as per agility, be on the customer. So the more focus you can give to the customer and drive more customer centricity, the more innovation you can have. And the more innovation you have, the better your strategy is around innovation. And the way I see it is that strategy is innovation and agility, because you can have these long-term 10-year strategies, but they rarely ever pan out. And I always think about strategy. Someone told me quite some time as a Pac-Man strategy, which is kind of, you have this idea of that you need to clear this Pac-Man board, and you have this little Pac-Man that goes blip, 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 and a ghost comes, and then you need to pivot and you need to change direction. And for me, that's a better strategy to take, especially in very volatile, uncertain times. And then we kind of look at the strategic signals. And, kind of when we think about strategic signals, as leaders, we have to have our antennas out. We have to kind of observe, what's happening in the world, where the world is going. We have to have that long-term horizon view to understand around, how do we start moving towards that uncertain future? And what are those few touch points that we can start experimenting on now so that we can get there? So your strategic signals kind of give you the overview, and a good place to always start with strategic signals, and then again, being in risk management, is really your group top risks. If you work in an organization, understand what those big risks are, and understand how do you start innovating to mitigate those risks. Once you do that, you formulate a hypothesis, and your hypothesis could be around, is there a new technology that we could use? Are there different competitors that are non-traditional that we need to compete with? Or can we look at, different consumers, people that don't ordinarily buy from us, the non-consumers, and how do we get them to become our consumers? So you formulate a hypothesis that you can then test, and then you test the hypothesis. And the job as a leader is to really test as many hypotheses as possible, and understand that sometimes the hypothesis may not be valid. Sometimes you're going to have to drop the hypothesis, and sometimes you're going to have to add new hypothesis. So that's kind of the strategic signals bit. And then we kind of move around to the innovate. And when we kind of look into the future, Abraham Lincoln said it quite eloquently, to say that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And this is kind of where we need to innovate. And I found this interesting because we kind of looked at this from a design thinking perspective before, an agile perspective. And I kind of wanted to see what the agile mindsets were versus the design thinking mindsets. And I found a really nice paper called The Design Thinking Mindset, and kind of an assessment of how design thinking works in practice. And there's a lot of similarities and parallels between these things, but I'm going to quickly take you through, some of these key ones. So the first mindset from an innovation perspective, and particularly design thinking, is this notion of empathy. And it's this being empathetic towards other people's needs and context. And when we talk about empathy, it's really the ability to see and experience something through another person's eyes. And that's really at the heart of design thinking. And what it does is it allows us to develop emotion-rich innovation in product development, whether it's technology products or physical products, but it becomes a lot more emotionally rich product development. And the key premise of empathy is two things. It's around asking the right questions, listening, and then observing. And observing is key. Sitting back and understanding that process, looking and being very open and receptive to what's potentially happening. And then you synthesize that information. The second mindset is around being collaboratively geared and embracing diversity. And you kind of need to, this is needed in order to deal with these multiple facets of complexity, because the more diverse your team is, the easier it is to drive that decision. And diversity has to happen across all spectrums, right? Whether it's race diversity, gender diversity, social diversity, diversity in terms of function, in terms of expertise. So the more diverse a team is, the better. And Satya Nadella talks about this a lot, and particularly in his book Hit Refresh, where he says that we kind of look at all the biases in AI at the moment, and particularly a really interesting way to understand that is and I don't know how it works, but if I go to Google and I Google pretty woman as an example, out of the first 100 images, about 90% are white females. And that's really not right? We should be thinking we're a global society. If you type pretty woman, you would have a whole range of different images coming up. But because of the data that's fed into these algorithms, it comes up with things that are more prominent. So the only way we can deal with some of those things is to have a diverse team. Because the more diverse team there is, the easier it is to understand some of these challenges and hopefully rectify them. And the diversity also promotes this rapid problem solving. We also need to be inquisitive to open perspectives and new learning. And this is where we kind of learn through exploring and experimenting and testing and gathering feedback and adapting. And this is where we kind of synthesize a lot of the information. We also need to be mindful of the process and thinking modes. So there's some really interesting work by Edward de Bono, who coined the term lateral thinking, that talks about these 6 thinking hats, and we use different colors based on where we are in the process, being mindful of whether we're having ideation session where we diverging our thinking, or whether we're converging our thinking, or where we are in the process, because it's important for people to be aligned on those things and to find commonality in those things. Then we kind of look at experiential intelligence. And this is really being able to try out new ideas. And again, from an agile perspective, the working solution is a really good experiential intelligence process, because it allows you to put something into the hands of the user and get feedback really quickly. So we do this in design thinking through mock-ups and prototypes and all these things. And once it's experienced, it's tested. So we can get feedback really quickly. The other mindset is around taking action deliberately and overtly. And this is around choosing action-oriented behavior, getting it out and trying it out in the real world. We also have to be consciously creative. And this is really difficult, because we need to be comfortable with all these weird creative methods and speaking differently. We need to encourage others to partake. And when we do that, we kind of use different parts of our brain, and it allows us to think very differently through ideas. So we kind of like to express ideas through drawing and models and so forth. And then we have to also be accepting of some level of uncertainty to risk, right? Because we need to create a future that's very different from the present, and that is risky. It does mean that we have to try things that we've never done before, and it's the antithesis of what risk management is, but it's also the way we overcome risk. So we kind of need to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, and kind of not knowing those outcomes easily. We also have to model our behavior. So we kind of have to build momentum in projects, model positive behavior, and we have to be relentless on being optimistic, right? We have to try and say this will work and work, model that behavior. And then we kind of look at this desire and determination to make a difference. And that's kind of the same as modeling behavior, but as opposed to being externally focused, it's a little bit more internally focused. It's more intrinsic, where we kind of need to think about, can we really make a difference in what we're trying to do, and how do we make sure we move towards that? And then finally, it's about being critical and critically questioning things, making sure that we understand different opinions, making sure that we're getting these different opinions from our diverse team, reframing the problem, and being very and not and being open to trying these new things. So kind of when I look at innovation, we have to think about all these different mindsets, which again align very closely to what Agile values, the Agile Manifesto talks about. And then kind of, I'm not going to go through this, but I think most of the people online understand, this notion of iteration, and you then have a clear vision, you put things into your backlog, you then decide what you're going to do in a sprint, you then sprint, you have your daily stand-ups, you have your working solution, and then you review, retrospect, and plan over and over. So I'm not going to get into much detail around this for this group of people, because I think there's a good familiarity around that. But Bonang Mohale, in his book, Lift As You Rise, kind of talks about the fact that courage is the primary ingredient of leadership. And the way he says it is that most decisions that require leadership are scary. And he kind of talks about the fact that because these decisions are so difficult, and they often don't impact a single person, but often impact an entire organization, in some instances the country, or even the world, right? These decisions are very difficult and scary to make. And if these decisions were easy to make, everyone would be willing to make them, and we wouldn't need leaders. So really, when we kind of talk about leadership, being willing to lead really means being willing to take those scary decisions. And oops, I apologize. I was looking at the comments on the chat. And kind of when we talk about it, Nelson Mandela says that, he learned that the courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. It's not the brave man that is not, who does not feel afraid, but who conquers that fear. So when we kind of talk about this notion of courage, it's not to say that you're not fearful. I think we're all fearful of what the future may hold. We're all fearful of trying out new things, but having courage is the ability to take that decision and work through it. And kind of when we look at these key ingredients of a courageous leader, and this is kind of just in summary of everything I've talked about, it's really to set the vision, purpose, and strategy, as well as the direction of the organization or product that you want to deliver. It's really to scan for these weak signals and understand what's happening in the world. It's to be able to manage towards outcomes rather than just managing in general. It's about that ability to give the team the motivation and environment to get the job done. So it's really creating the environment for people to flourish. It's about listening and active listening. It's the ability to release teams to figure out how to address challenges. Is to remove impediments, which is not only for the Scrum Master, but also for leadership, so that they can support the team so that they can do the work. And it's about being a servant leader, serving other people in your role, and being willing to learn themselves. So it's about being this constant, having a growth mindset effectively. And I really like Netflix as an organization. I find them phenomenal. But most companies tend to have just generic value statements. But I really like the way Netflix positions one of their values, which is courage. And the way they talk about it is that when they talk about courage, it's the ability to say what you think when it's the best interest of the company, even if it's uncomfortable. It's the ability to take tough decisions without agonizing. It's about taking smart risks that are open and possible to failure, open to possible failure, but trying to get as much progression and learning through that process. It's about questioning any values that are inconsistent or incongruent with the company itself. And it's about being a little bit vulnerable in search of what the truth is. All of this is about this continuous aspirational stretch, and trying to drive the right behavior. So kind of when we need to test the limits of our courage, it's effectively in the face of adversity, being willing to stand up for your beliefs and striving to continuously do the right thing. And again, bringing back to my daughter, she goes to a lovely school called Kingsmead College, and their motto is courage always. And for me, that really resonates. I love the fact that they're teaching these young girls at a very young age to kind of always have this notion of courage. So kind of in closing, what I want you to please do is go back into your breakout room and kind of think about and ruminate around what I discussed, and then have another conversation around, in this age of digital disruption, what do you feel are some of the supplies that Scary Squirrel or your team would have to pack in order to be relevant for the future? So Angie, if you can just help managing some of those breakout rooms, and then you'll see on Mural, you'll have the section at the bottom where you can then please have that conversation and discussion.
Okay, Chris, I just want to...
Welcome back, everyone. All right, so maybe just looking at the two groups and particularly the pink group, just some feedback, please, around some of these survival supplies that you'd need packing for the future.
So some of the things that we said was you have to keep an open mindset. If this period is anything to go by, I mean, you couldn't really afford to be comfortable. So, and also then, which leads me to my next point, you need to be able to take the leap without having all the information, and then it's almost like build the plane as it flies. So that would be the tools that we actually noted were mental tools, not necessarily like your mask and your hand sanitizer. So that's what we spoke about. And then Naledi?
Sorry, what is that last point, Nana?
I was asking Naledi to jump in.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought you said.
So in terms of, from our side, for me, so I just added an action plan. I think it's important to put the steps you need to go and take in terms of doing that. Research and analysis, also the environment. So examples like you can do a pestle analysis, you can do a SWOT analysis, and taking a calculated risk as well.
Cool, thank you, Naledi. And I understand that the kids are there. You did mention that earlier, so thank you for stepping up there. And then we'll just jump to the second group, maybe give an overview of some of your survival supplies.
So in our group 3, we said what is important is courage, a responsiveness to adaptation, or for adaptation, a sense to go with the flow during disruptions, and openness being broad in the sense that it's openness to many things, to different opinions, different people, and etc. We also said self-care, which encompasses health, and in health in all senses, your spiritual health, your mental health, your physical health, and etc. Creativity, innovation, curiosity. And lastly, we also thought that it's important to have to embrace fear, the ability to embrace fear, and the resilience to take on whatever it is that comes your way.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think really, that in closing, it's really thinking about, that call to action, taking some of the aspects of the conversation and thinking, when you go back to work tomorrow, what are those few things that you're going to do slightly differently, and then maybe go home and think about that. And that's pretty much it from me. So thank you very much for listening and contributing. Yeah, and appreciate. Thank you, Angie. So Angie has just sent the feedback form. Please, if you can, take some time to fill it out and see how we can adapt this presentation a little bit more, or how I can improve. It would be valued. Thank you.
Before we end, Nilesh, well done. Thank you very much just for being the first speaker at the
My pleasure.